Okay. Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to our special tribute to Dr. Shani Twersky. We're really honored to be able to present just a little bit about Dr. Twersky's incredible life as a physician, as a mentor, as a community member, as a friend, as a mother. We have a lineup of amazing physicians that have been really impacted personally by Dr. Twersky, and we hope to share some memories. We will be recording this, and just also wanted to welcome Dr. Twersky's family, the Schreibers who are joining us tonight. We will keep the chat box open, so if you want to share memories or speak, you can definitely chat in the box. And we're going to get started with Dr. Shmuel Roth.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Mimi, for asking me to speak. Dr. Shani Twersky Schreiber lived a full life that included love for and service to her family, community, and countless friends. She was much more than an outstanding anesthesiologist. She was a trailblazer, a role model, and a friend to many. I got to know about some of her remarkable qualities, only a small sampling of which I'm going to be able to discuss with you tonight. She worked with the top people in academic anesthesiology and was one of the first women to rise to the very top of leadership in the ASA, which is the American Society of Anesthesiologists, and the SAMBA, which is the Society for Ambulatory Anesthesia. She was the most visible, successful firm woman in academic anesthesiology, and she always conducted herself in a stately, commanding manner. This was no small feat, which involved overcoming numerous challenges and indeed working with some very intense, driven individuals. Many hours of hard work went into writing guidelines and practice advisories, performing clinical research, writing papers, not to mention traveling and long days away from home, including being away for Shabbos. I know what it takes because this has been my own professional life as an academic anesthesiologist. She somehow found the time and ability to do it. She had remarkable siyata d'shmaya, juggling all of these responsibilities while being a wife, mother, and a balas chesed. At first, with me being in Chicago and her in New York, I was able to see her success from afar. In the early 90s, she worked with two of my former chairs at the University of Chicago, Jeff Applebaum and Mike Roizen. The three of them and a small group of other pioneers established SAMBA, setting the stage for what is today the routine practice of outpatient anesthesia and surgery. Advances in acute pain therapy, non-opioid alternatives, anti-nausea drugs, rapid-acting anesthetics, and minimally invasive surgery, popularized by doctors like Ricky Twersky, completely changed the landscape of surgery in America. She authored very important articles affecting the practice of anesthesia, and all were accomplished without any grant funding at all, making them all the more remarkable. I got to know Shani Ricky, or Ricky, I keep on saying going back and forth, but let's just say Shani, more closely as I became more involved in the leadership of the ASA. For 7 years, I was the vice chair and later chair of the ASA Scientific Advisory Committee, responsible for the scientific presentations at the annual meeting. With her suggestion, I was able to add a checkbox for no Sabbath presentation on the abstract submission site. One year, she was the director of the annual meeting. The key part of the meeting, which runs from Friday to Wednesday, is actually on Shabbos. One year, it was in Chicago, she spent Shabbos with her aunt, Mrs. Sender, Elva Shalom. Rabbi and Mrs. Sender attended the same shul I davened in, and that Shabbos, we had a very long discussion where I began to learn more about the godless. Turns out the annual meeting is a very complex event. There's over 20,000 attendees and numerous sessions running at the same time, as well as social events, lectures, panel discussions, scientific and clinical presentations, and even an art exhibit. I was just amazed that she managed to pull this off without even being there on the most important day of the meeting. She truly cared about people and helped them advance. In 2009, she invited me to speak at the New York State Society of Anesthesiologists annual meeting. It was and is extremely difficult for a non-New Yorker to get invited. As a bonus, she asked me to author a review article for which she was the editor in the British Journal of Anesthesia. Chazal write that Kashas Ivugim Kakriyas Yamsuf. Upon learning that my son and hers were in the same year at BMG, she became so excited and tried to find a shidduch for him, as well as our next younger son, who also was in BMG. She called me about girls here in Chicago for shidduchim. She kept on sending resumes for our single boys and girls. Little did I know, this was merely a piece of her little chesed project. She was a pro-shadchan that had made many shidduchim. In a famous letter to a Becker that had left the yeshiva, Rev Hutner Zetzal answered the concerns of the Becker who thought that he was living a double life, that is, conducting his business one way and his Yiddishkeit another. But Shani Twersky exemplified this call. There is no such thing as a double life in Judaism. She openly let it be known that her entire life was conducted according to the Torah. This was a massive Kiddush Hashem, and I don't know if anyone in anesthesiology has achieved this level. She treated everyone as chashuv. She stayed at her house in Chicago for Shabbos when she was attending the Samba meeting. She was so excited to learn that her post-seminary daughter had the same almost name as her, Shoshana Rivka. What a big deal she made of that, and the cookies our daughter Shani made for that Shabbos, as if they were the best she had ever tasted. It was just being macabre another person. A cousin of our daughter's friend was passing through and also stayed with us. While the men were at Mincha, this young woman started up a deep conversation with her. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to get into all the details, but let's just say it turns out that's Efrat, who's on the Orthodox chat group, who today is a resident anesthesiology in Mount Sinai. She reciprocated the Hachnasas Orchim when she offered for us to stay in her house when we attended an Ofruf in Far Rockaway. My son, daughter-in-law, and 10-month-old son were also there. Although the child was quite active, she sat on the floor playing with him for hours. My daughter-in-law was amazed that someone so busy, so accomplished, had time for a little boy that was not even her own. She offered to stay in touch with him via FaceTime, just like her own grandson. These few observations that I'm stating here showed just a small glimpse of the person. Many times, real greatness in Olam Hazeh is shrouded by a veil. Shani Twersky Schreiber exemplified that. She exhibited stateliness, Kiddush Hashem, and caring for others that should set an example for all of us to follow. Teish Nishmasa Tzurubet Zorachayim.
Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Jerry Parnas.
There we go. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So this is really a reminiscence and appreciation of Shani Rebecca Twersky. As a fellow academic, from anesthesiologist, our paths, though divergent in geography and academic focus, I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist exclusively. So we would occasionally at national meetings, such as those of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, International Anesthesia Research Society, and the Association of University Anesthesiologists. Since our first meetings, in the late 1990s or early aughts, I knew this woman was going places. Always dressed modestly and professionally, as well as elegantly, her shaitel, a nearly singular statement of her unabashed Jewish religiosity, her smile and genuine humanity was a trademark of her personality. She carried herself with confidence, joy, and professionalism. Rebecca exuded clinical competence, confidence, and knowledge. From our first meeting, I sensed that she was born to lead, and she forged ahead where few others had tread. Rebecca was amongst the earliest anesthesiologists who recognized that ambulatory surgical suites and protocols for safe office-based anesthesia practices, now taken for granted, needed formal development. She went on to help create and lead societies that devised the organizational and medical protocols necessary for the delivery of safe and safe anesthesia in these out-of-hospital settings. She was a consummate clinician, colleague, teacher, advocate, clinical scientist, and professional leader. When she spoke or expressed an opinion, everyone listened. Rebecca was trusted and respected by everyone. She was the living embodiment of the notion that being a frum wife and mother did not require the truncation of her professional goals and public success. Indeed, she crowned her career as chief of anesthesia at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Which leads me to describing a very early encounter with her in our hotel, attending some large meeting relatively early in our careers. It was a Friday, and a good friend and colleague and fellow frum pediatric anesthesiologist, David Polliner, who will be speaking a little later in the series. At that time, we were the only two observant Jews in this subspecialty. We're cutting our afternoon attendance at the meeting short to get ready. I was introduced to her. She too was in a bit of a rush to get ready for Shabbat. David and I had developed the habit of either rooming together or taking adjoining rooms, bringing home-baked challah, good wine, home-cooked food for Shabbat. We pretty much had decided to blow off Saturday meetings in general and attend a local shul for davening. We asked Rebecca to join us, and she did that time as her husband was home with her children for Shabbat. That Friday night meal was just momentously enjoyable. How we first got to, quote unquote, know each other. She too had decided never to attend Saturday portions of the meetings. And when she became really successful and was on many panels or gave lectures, as the previous speaker noted, she insisted that they do not occur on Shabbat, and she got her way. In 20 years, not less frequently, but significantly, and for me, this was amazing. She was often accompanied by her husband. He was successful in his own right, but his admiration for Rebecca was on full display at those meetings. She never again needed to spend Friday night Shabbat dinners with David and me. It had become a tradition for us to invite unaffiliated Jewish colleagues to Kiddush or dinner with us Friday nights, as well as later on when some other people became anesthesiologists. And but she had her husband waiting for her in their hotel room with Shabbat dinner ready. He was her greatest supporter. I would admit that Rebecca's passing was a huge shock to me. I had no idea that she was ill since I had not seen her in years. She'd accomplished so much and had yet so much to give. My heart goes out to the loving and devoted husband who encouraged her to all her accomplishments, as well as to the rest of her family. Yehi zichra baruch, v'sheneira ta'ir et darkan shel benot Yisrael. And if it's still within Shloshim, hamakom yinachem mishpachta b'toch sha'arei Tzion Yerushalayim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parnas. We're going to hear from Dr. SUZIE and KARAN next.
Thank you. I'm actually in awe that I'm even talking on behalf of, I call Dr. Twersky, because she's a real mentor to me, and I still can't even probably would still call Dr. Polliner, Dr. Parnas, their names too. Anywho, I met Dr. Twersky in Brooklyn. We davened at the same shul. I was a medical student. Dr. Twersky served as a role model to me, and my decision to become an anesthesiologist was very much informed by our conversations and what appeared to me to be her incredibly fulfilled life. She was the one who advised me to actually train in Rochester, New York. She told me, you'll find amazing mentorship in the chair up there, and I did. My family planning, and yes, der Mensch tracht und Gott lacht, also followed in her footsteps, with my having children at each stepping stone of my professional development, as she did hers. Was always a treat to run into her at a national regional meeting. And as you guys have said, she always made me feel like the most special person on the face of this earth. Even bumping into her on a street corner, she would stop and just focus. A few years back, we were co-participants at a meeting in Washington, D.C. that occurred over Shabbos. And like has been said, it was especially admirable that Dr. Twersky had maintained her leadership in our academic and clinical world while still strictly keeping Shabbat. And so during that weekend, she included me. It was last minute in her Friday night meal, and that itself was a learning experience. But the most special thing, though, was the package that I received a few weeks later as a surprise in the mail, which was a 10-piece Shabbat away travel set with the instructions to pay it forward. And I have, and I will continue to do so in her honor and in her memory, and may it always be for a bracha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karen. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. David Polaner.
How do
We can hear you.
okay, you can hear me? Okay, I can see myself in the little window, but I'm actually still in the operating room. I first met Ricky at an ASA meeting, like so many of us are talking about. Is there somebody who's not muted?
Everyone, please mute yourself unless you're speaking.
So I first met Ricky also at an ASA meeting, perhaps the same one as Jerry did. And we had Shabbatot and Chagim together for years. I particularly recall a time when the meeting was in Florida, and she and I were in correspondence before the meeting to try and set up something because the ASA fell over Sukkot. So it was a Chol HaMoed Sukkot. She brought her daughter along, one of her daughters along to the meeting. And we found a hotel that said they had a sukkah, they had food, it was kosher. We explored it a bit, it sounded legitimate. We got down there, we expected a whole crowd of people who were also Shomer Shabbat at the meeting. But it turned out that there were only 3 people in that sukkah. It was me and Ricky and her daughter. We had every meal together, both Shabbat Chol HaMoed and just the regular Chol HaMoed meals. And it was certainly not a usual Chag, but it was one of the most memorable ones that I've had because of her companionship, her conversation, and as everybody has already said, her incredible commitment to both Yiddishkeit as well as her career, and to build an academic career while being Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Mitzvot, involves a lot of difficulty and a lot of sacrifice. Ricky really exemplified how you could do this and really be Mekadesh Shem Shemayim by doing it, and create an understanding among people, both Jews who are not observant and among people who are not Jewish, who really understand that our practice of medicine is an extension of our chesed as observant Jews. And I think that that's something that I learned a lot about how to do from Ricky, and something that I'll always remember about her. Tiya nashmata tzura b'eretz chaim, and hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch avalei tziron b'Yerushalayim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Polaner. And I love that you're speaking directly from the operating room. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Beth Pop.
Since the day I heard about this event, paying tribute to my dear friend Shani, who some of you knew more as Rebecca or Ricky, I was hoping to provide some nechama, most importantly to Baruch David, to Bela, Yitzi, Nomi, and their families, as well as to many of us who were her friends and colleagues. I composed what I wanted to say in my thoughts many times, too many to count, but it was a daunting task to get some words onto paper. I finally realized that it was my own sense of inadequacy about being able to find the words to capture a special relationship and an incredibly special person. I'm a physician on faculty at a medical school, but my relationship was more with the woman I knew as Shani Schreiber, not Dr. Rebecca Twersky. I met Shani 28 years ago through our mutual friends, Dr. Bobby and SUZIE Schulman. More than a decade before I met them, they had befriended Shani, a frum woman from out of town who had moved from California to New York and hoped to start a career in medicine. I was already finished with much of my training when I moved to New York, and the Schulmans took me in as a bas bias when I moved from Indiana. They had me join them and their family for countless Shabbosos, helping me meet friends and colleagues through our mutual interests in medical halacha and the fact that their daughter Tamar, now Tamar Rosner, was about to start medical school. I stayed with the Schulmans for Pesach, as making Pesach in my studio apartment during fellowship felt daunting. And as a result, I was included along with the Schulmans to spend the last days of Pesach as guests at Shani and Baruch David's house. Bela, Yitzi, and Nomi were little kids, but I soon had a second surrogate family in Flatbush, in addition to the surrogate family I had developed in Borough Park and the Schulmans. Shani became like a big sister who showed me the ropes. From that very first time staying at her house, I learned what yapchik was. I learned about not mishing on Pesach, and I got an insight into the incredible Hasidic heritage that Shani came from. Shani's father was there, and after they came home from shul, he roped Baruch David and Yitzi and Bobby Schulman into dancing in the living room, singing Az Yashir. My kids all know about that story all these years later, even though they never had the zchus to meet Shani's father. I learned so many things from Shani that I didn't know about in Indiana. Shani was delighted when she discovered that I was dating a graduate of the anesthesia residency where she was on faculty. She opened her house and let me stay there overnight in Flatbush when I was looking for apartments because I was moving to Brooklyn as I finished my fellowship. And I was taking a job in the VA that was affiliated with SUNY where she was on faculty. We were going to get to be colleagues. And I went on more than a few dates with that young anesthesia former resident from her house. Eventually we got engaged and she finally confided that she would have never thought about setting us up, even though she was very involved in shadchanas, but she couldn't have been more delighted that she hadn't seen it coming and that we had gotten engaged. As luck would have it, we got an apartment a block away from their house, and Shani was always there for Shabbos meals and Shana Rishona advice. And when our family grew, she was always happy for a Shabbos afternoon visit, whether I came by myself or with or without one of the little boys who joined our family. Shani was like the smart older sister I could turn to for advice. How to adjust to Brooklyn when you're not from there. How to be a frum woman in academic medicine. How to be a working doctor mom. Her relationship with Ruthie was my model for how to have a relationship with the women who helped me care for my children and my home while I was at work. The Schreibers and Ruthie were together through all their children growing up. I didn't learn that lesson quite so perfectly from Shani because I had two women who helped me raise my children and take care of my house over the years my kids were growing. But even Janice, who was with us for 15 years, knew that was ever successful about our relationship was because of what I learned from Shani and Ruthie. I wasn't a clone of Shani, not the internationally famous faculty pioneer of a new subspecialty in anesthesia. In fact, I found it really hard to go back to work after my first son was born, surprisingly difficult. And Shani was among the people who I could speak to about that struggle. She could understand it. And along with my husband, she helped me figure out what would be the right solution for our family. And it didn't need to be the same solution that had worked for her and her family. Shani, or in this case, she was more being Dr. Twersky, was uniquely able to let me think through the implications of working part-time and what the effect on my academic medical career would be, my family, and before it was a buzzword, my own well-being. She always cheered for my successes, and she helped me lick my wounds when there were disappointments. More importantly, she always helped me pick myself up dust myself off, and start all over again. Shani was the doctor in her family, and I marveled at how she managed to use her knowledge and connections in the healthcare system to help her extended family through serious illnesses. She did it with a humility that belied her stature in the world of academic medicine. She once shared with me concern about an occasional time when she needed to really assert herself as Professor Dr. Twersky because it was essential. And she did not want to alienate anyone or chas v'shalom, create a chilul Hashem. She had handled the situation masterfully, but for some reason, surprising to me, she didn't feel confident about it. Shani, as you've heard, saw everything through eyes that saw the hand of Hashem in everything. And the only thing that I said in the very long conversation that gave her some peace was when I paraphrased Mordechai from Megillas Esther and said, perhaps Esther, that is why you became the queen. Perhaps Shani, that's why you became a doctor, so you could do these things to help your family. I didn't see Shani often during the years after she and Baruch David and the kids relocated to the 5 towns. Mostly I saw her at simchas, either ours or theirs. And that meant we were delighted to see each other and incredibly happy for the simcha. But one of us was too busy being the host to have much time for catching up. Once or twice, she would call me with a question she thought I could help her with, a professional question. And I was stunned. It's like when the accountant's child gets asked by their parents to do their taxes. It was so humbling to have somebody who I respected and admired so much, who had so much expertise herself and had so much access to others, ask me for advice. It made me feel like I had finally grown up professionally and really gave me a tremendous appreciation for being respected in her eyes, not just as a friend, but as a colleague. I respected her privacy and knew very little about her illness, but she told me that the one thing that helped her the most was davening and knowing that others were davening for her. Her name was on my Tehillim list for years and was one of the few names that I knew by heart, even when the Eruv was down and I couldn't take my Tehillim list with me to Shul on Shabbos afternoon for our women's Tehillim group. That was the essence of a woman with Emunah Pshuta. Just daven for me. That's all I need. Everything else will be right because Hashem will take care of it. I last saw her in her new office at Memorial's Josie Roberts Surgery Center when I found myself unexpectedly in the neighborhood on a weekday. Things were not going great for me at work, and I took a chance that she'd have a minute to say hello. I knew she would give me incredible chizuk. Not only was she around and made time for me, but she showed incredible pleasure in the accomplishment, but not conceit, of the surgery center that she had helped develop for Memorial. She shared things that were unique that she knew I'd appreciate from having trained at Memorial decades before. Special touches that made things better for patients and families, and those working to provide them with care. She felt privileged to have had the opportunity to do that and had so much gratitude for that opportunity, as well as the many others that she had had in her career. That was before COVID hit, and I didn't know anything about the difficult period that she had had at home until I came to be Menachem Avel. A mutual friend sent me the heartfelt Hespedim said at her Levaya, and I was comforted by hearing about the way she and her family had the shluchim they needed to help them through those difficult months. This has been a great loss, and our pain is great. That's the tax we pay for having had such a wonderful friend and colleague in our lives. And to appreciate how much she was a gift we got to enjoy for the years she was in our lives, in whatever capacity she was in our lives, personal and professional. It's the only way to assuage the sadness. As I said before I began to speak, I composed my words mentally many times, but I couldn't put them down on paper because I just felt it was impossible to adequately capture Shani, what our friendship meant, and how much I admired and respected her for all the things that you've heard other people talk about. As I stayed late on call, I was determined to get the words on paper, and I shared my difficulty with a colleague who didn't know Shani. She asked me if I thought Shani would understand if my finished product was inadequate. I hope she would have. And after understanding, she would have given me encouragement and suggestions and coaching and help to make it better, because that's what she did. Whether personally, professionally, or both, she listened to what we aspired to accomplish, and then with keen intelligence and always based in her faith and the degree to which she just effused chesed, she found ways to help us reach our meaningful goals as well as reaching her own. I don't have her to help me with that now, and sadly, none of us do. But we can pay tribute to her by inculcating those values of keeping steadfast in our faith, having integrity, and supporting one another to have success in our families and our careers, and find the path that's correct for each of us. I've done my best to capture some of what I had hoped to share, and I'm still sure that it's inadequate. But I'll do what we all must do going forward. Try to imagine what Shani would have said or done to help us make ourselves and our projects better, and then apply that advice. May we all find opportunities to do these things in Shani's merit, and hope that they bring comfort to her family, her friends, and her community.
So much, Dr. Pop, for your incredible words. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Bobby Balakana.
Hello, everyone. I'm not so sure if I'm deserving of following such tremendous speakers. That was really beautiful, Dr. Pop. I just wanted to share a few memories and Hakarat Tov I had of Dr. Twersky. I was a resident at Downstate between 2013 and 2016, and she was one of my mentors and teachers and attendings over there. And one of the stories that I remember was I was speaking to her about possibly applying to a fellowship at Sloan, and she told me, "Oh, that's so funny. I'm considering taking a position over there as the chairman of the ambulatory department." So she was I was like, "Oh wow, so what is holding you up? What is the decision pending on?" She's like, "I have to speak to my Rav," and the Rav told me that it's a good idea, and it was just so amazing to recognize that such an accomplished academic professor who's like one of the top anesthesiologists in the country, that Torah was so important for her, and that to be such a foundational thing in her life had a real tremendous impact on me. Just as a nechama for the family, for Mr. Schreiber and the children, I just think it's incredible to just see. Most people would be proud if they affected 5 or 10 people in her life. Just in our anesthesia group alone, there's Dr. Avishai Newman, Nachum Wolfish, Dov Ginsburg, Dan Geisler, like 5 or 6 just in our group alone of residents who graduated from downstate. That's not even to mention Mina Katza Lakatza from Sephardic, Ashkenaz, Jewish, non-Jewish. When I mentioned it to Dr. Saad Mohammed a few weeks ago, he wrote a whole letter about how Dr. Twersky was one of the most important people in his life, and he's only where he is in his academic ladder because of her. So it's just so incredible how many people she affected. And I was looking through my phone and I saw my text messages, the last text messages. And after I graduated from Downstate, I had invited her to my son's Brit Milah, and she had answered back, "Oh, Mazel Tov, so wonderful to hear from you." And I'm sure she's had hundreds and hundreds of residents in the past X amount of years she had been at Downstate. But I remember I received the package in the mail from her as a gift, which I really found incredible. So I just wanted to say to the family, husband and children, you should have so much, you should be comforted, and you should also recognize, Baruch Hashem, that she had such an effect on thousands, tens of thousands of lives on a daily basis because of all the trees she planted and people she helped, as you saw in all the speeches given tonight. And I thank you so much. And I thank her so much as well. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, I was also looking when I heard that Dr. Twersky passed. I looked at my last message and I saw it was the evening before we were going to be honoring her at our first conference for JOMA. And she mentioned that she, was getting the flu and she wasn't able to come. And of course, I realize now at that time, how she was sick. But I have to say that, we're going to hear next from Dr. Becker and Dr. Greenberg, who represents, the next generation of women physicians who wouldn't be here today without her. And I think it's just so incredible how, we all aspire in our careers to reach even a fraction of what Dr. Twersky was able to accomplish, but she wasn't only able to accomplish that. She was also able to accomplish that with being so proud to be from so incredibly gracious and helpful to mentees, both Jewish, both non-Jewish, such an incredible leader, friend, mother, community member. It's just so incredible to take stock and just realize how much a person could accomplish in one lifetime. It's really, really unbelievably humbling. So we're going to hear next from Dr. Sarah Becker.
Thanks, Mimi. So I think as Mimi, you alluded to, I know Dr. Twersky from a different perspective from the other people who have spoken thus far, in that I first met her as Mrs. Schreiber when they moved to the 5 towns from Brooklyn. And I think the first time I actually ever met Mrs. Schreiber was when I think they were in the process of moving still, but still living in Brooklyn. And she dropped Nomi off, in our class in 2nd grade. Did not occur to me at that time that she was a doctor. And I don't actually have a clear memory of when I learned that, Mrs. Schreiber had a secret identity or a dual identity as Dr. Twersky. Maybe it was I slept over one night and she was leaving really early to work. Maybe Nomi mentioned something casually. I don't have a clear memory, and part of that may be that I'm fortunate to have my own role model who's actually on the Zoom as well. As some of you know, my mother is also a doctor and was also very good friends, with Mrs. Schreiber. So, at the time as a kid, I didn't really appreciate Mrs. Schreiber was anything different, right? She was quite regular, it was quite normal. Sleepovers were very normal. Play dates were very normal. Going to shul on Shabbos was very normal. Being invited for, regular Shabbos meals. Even probably the regular disagreement that mothers and daughters and mothers and daughters' friends have about schoolwork and homework and going to bed on time. Everything was very normal, was very Mrs. Schreiber. And as I grew older, probably I would say in about high school was when I started to appreciate that Dr. Rebecca Twersky was not regular and not just plain normal, but she was in fact a standout. She graduated medical school in 1983, which was a time when from women in medicine was most definitely not the regular. And then in the years that followed, obviously before I met her, she played many, many important roles in her field of anesthesia. She was this pioneer in ambulatory anesthesia. She was this prolific researcher. She was a successful mentor. She's an academic. She's a well-respected clinician. There's no other word for her. She was a leader. She was a leader in her field while being this regular, normal from mother. And on top of that, as many others have probably mentioned and have better firsthand experience than I do, is that you really couldn't and still cannot separate all of these worldly accomplishments from what I would call her otherworldly beliefs, right? She was a person who was very principled. And I knew that she was very principled as my friend's mother. Again, okay, girls, you have sleepover. Did you wake up? Did you daven? Did you, but it wasn't just in the house, right? It was outside the house. It was, in her work life, everybody knew about her principles in Yiddishkeit, whether it was Shabbos, whether it was Sneas, whether it was the fact, if she gave an interview for any, publication, somehow Yiddishkeit was going to be in there, or if it was just a casual conversation. I think Dr. Pop, you posted on the JOMA chat the ASA tribute, which I think came out this month to Dr. Twersky, and of course it lists her many scholastic accomplishments. But then there's a line in there that says, Dr. Twersky was well known for her devotion to her family and her friends and her deep religious faith. And so this was something that came out in all aspects of her life. And it came out to people, regardless, this is not from people. This is just people who just knew her and said, obviously this is something that's really big. This is something that really matters to her. And so, when I think about Mrs. Schreiber, AKA Dr. Twersky, I think about the question of how does someone who is such a standout, how do they fit in, right? Just so seamlessly. And, or if her nature is that she's a person who's regular and fits in, so then how did she stand out, And it's like, so wait, so was she Mrs. Schreiber? Was she Dr. Twersky? Was it some, Clark and Superman? Was it, that there's this one part of her and then there's this secret identity and this is how she just, fits into the frum community. So I don't know, so she doesn't stand out. And I think all of that is just patently wrong, right? If you're kind of thinking about those questions, it's not the right way to think about Mrs. Schreiber and Dr. Twersky, because really the truth is she was both. She was very much both. It wasn't she was one despite the other. It was she embraced each role in her life fully, wholly, and completely. And in every circumstance, whatever it was, she acted as the situation called for. And when you live your life like that, it's not surprising that she was this extraordinary wife, extraordinary mother, extraordinary clinician, extraordinary researcher, extraordinary mentor, extraordinary leader, okay? But above all, she was an extraordinary Yid. She was an extraordinary Jew who put Hashem first at all time and was focused on doing the Ratzon Hashem in each and every situation. And that's how you have a person who could be both a Mrs. Schreiber and a Dr. Twersky.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becker. Last, we're going to hear from Dr. Greenberg.
I grew up in Lakewood, New Jersey, and I really didn't have much exposure to college-educated women, let alone female physicians. My sister married Dr. Twersky's son in the summer after I came home from seminary, and Dr. Schreiber, as I knew her, really was the first frum female physician that I knew personally. Dr. Schreiber always took such an interest in people around her. Like we heard from everybody, she was always trying to help everybody in any way possible. She was so happy when I decided to apply to medical school, and she was always actively asking after me. She was available for career advice and to help me make any decisions that came up. One area in which she took particular interest was in trying to set me up. She often sent me shidduch resumes and took the liberty of even looking into guys that I was already dating and letting me know if she approved. Dr. Schreiber had a force of personality that was both maternal and caring, but at the same time could be intimidating. There was one instance in which she set me up with a nice young man who I thought was wonderful, but a little too religious for me. So I called her after the date and I told her that. She was having none of it. She told me, not only do you have to go out with him again, but it needs at least 3 dates until you can decide if you want to continue. I was rightfully intimidated. So I not only went out with this wonderful man again, I even married him and had 2 kids with him. She was interested in both my personal and my professional life. She was so thrilled with her success at matchmaking, and she was constantly asking after my career. I decided to apply into anesthesiology in my third year of medical school. Of course, I like to think this was an independent decision that I arrived at after my medical school rotations and my interest in the subjects, which was all true. But Dr. Schreiber, as my role model, definitely played a very large part in this decision. When her illness advanced to the point where she was minimally active in her own career, she was still very active in trying to push my career forward, reaching out to program directors to try to get me interviews or using her extensive network to just help me out. When I matched into my first choice of program, she was one of the first people I wanted to text, but I knew she was no longer at a point where she could read and respond to texts. So I let her husband know, and Mr. Schreiber told me that she smiled when she heard the news. Dr. Schreiber was not just an inspiration to me in her career. She was also a wonderful example of an intellectual Jewish woman who was constantly striving to increase her Torah knowledge, and a Baal's Chesed who was always just looking to do good for others. She always wanted to know what shiurma was listening to, and she loved discussing a lecture that we had mutually enjoyed or some topic she had gotten interested in. What Dr. Schreiber showed me is that it's possible for someone to achieve greatness in every area in life. She never compromised. She was a doctor who delivered top quality care to her patients. She was a wife and mother whose family was her first priority. She was a Baal's Chesed who always did good for everybody in the community. And she was a Talmida Chachama who never stopped learning. As I begin my medical career and raising my own family, I will always remember her as a guiding light. Tehi Zechra Brucha.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and for our incredible speakers. Also wanted to come full circle and thank Rivka Frankel, who is a pre-med student who helped coordinate this tribute behind the scenes and did an incredible job. I'm sure Dr. Twersky would have been proud. And I just wanted to open up the floor. If anybody wants to share anything, you can unmute yourself, or if you'd like to message me and then I will introduce you, feel free.
We'd just like to thank everybody for participating. I'd like to thank the incredible speakers for reminiscing about my wife. Each of you captured a unique dimension of her personality, and you all recognized how she was able to coalesce and consolidate all of those different facets of her life, of her personality so seamlessly and so naturally. And I thank you for recognizing that. And I urge you to continue just to remember her and to do things in her memory. We miss her terribly, but seeing the type of impact that she had and hearing the type of emotions and the type of depth that each of you portrayed and presented makes us feel so much better. And I want to thank all of you for being there, for taking the time, and for arranging for this beautiful, beautiful tribute to her. And all of you get incredible credit. And I just thank all of you. Thank you.
So we have recorded this event, so we will share it with the family. And if you'd like to make it public, let us know. We've also compiled everyone's talks and we'll be sharing it with the family as well to be printed. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And the Shema should have an aliyah.